3. Submarine Graveyard. 9 of the 13 retired submarines kept out on the banks of the River Tamar in Devonport, UK, contain radioactive fuel, according to a government assessment that criticised the Ministry of Defence for its inability to get rid of old nuclear-powered submarines as they rot in the water. These days, the Royal Navy has twice as many subs in storage as it does in actual service, according to the National Audit Office report, and the Defence Ministry has failed to get rid of any one of the 20 boats that have been decommissioned since 1980. Additionally, since 2004, not a single sub has had its fuel taken out, and there's no fully funded plan to start defueling since the project has been delayed for 11 years with a $99.1 million, £100 million, 57% rise in price since. The MOD spends about $11.8 million a year maintaining and storing the 9 submarines in Devonport, according to the NAO's investigation into submarine defueling and dismantling. The government was warned that failing to solve the radioactive fuel problem could potentially harm the UK's credibility as a responsible nuclear state. They are being kept in Devonport and Rosyth while preparations are made for the safe disposal of the decommissioned vessels and the decades-old nuclear waste they contain. 7 of the submarines have been in storage for longer than they were in use by the Royal Navy. According to the NAO, the projected cost of getting rid of a submarine nears $100 million. To highlight the long-term destructive nature of nuclear waste, the MOD has estimated that its total future cost for maintaining and disposing of the 20 subs in storage and 10 in-service nuclear-powered vessels will be $7.4 billion over the next 120 years. Since 2004, when authorities determined that the defueling facilities did not meet the necessary standards, no submarines have been defueled, and the procedure's not scheduled to even start back up again until 2023. The Polaris boats, known as the HMS Revenge, HMS Renown, HMS Repulse, and HMS Resolution, are among the ships currently being stored. They were the first submarines to carry the UK's nuclear deterrence. Another of the boats in storage is the attack submarine HMS Conqueror, which sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano during the Falklands War in 1982. According to a representative from the Ministry of Defence, getting rid of nuclear submarines is a difficult and complicated task to tackle. They are still dedicated to defueling and destroying all unused nuclear submarines in a safe, secure, and affordable manner as soon as humanly possible, but it's taking quite a bit of time. In response to the National Audit Office's study on decommissioning nuclear submarines, Gary Graham, Deputy General Secretary of Prospect, has said that their experienced and well-respected workforce at Rosyth and Devonport has been dealing with a high number of layoffs and uncertainty, while the government hesitates over certain construction and decommissioning projects. He also stated that if they just began the task of decommissioning these boats, they could easily prevent the irreversible loss of future skills and jobs. Additionally, more submarines are likely to go out of service in the coming years, and they just lack the necessary space to accommodate them. The MOD and the government, he continued, seem content instead to continue throwing money away by merely storing these vessels. They have the ability to begin the decommissioning job right away, but have failed to do so. He says there's a chance for the government to develop and protect high-value employment in shipbuilding by using the knowledge already available to them in the civil decommissioning industry. As an extra benefit, Rosyth would be able to preserve the infrastructure and skills needed to sustain the historic HMS Queen Elizabeth at her home port. Lastly, Gary adds that it's time they just started tackling the project and gave their workforce the vote of confidence it rightly deserves. 2. Pripyat. As one of the biggest ghost towns in the world, Pripyat, Ukraine is well acquainted with emptiness and darkness. Before Chernobyl's number 4 reactor experienced the worst nuclear meltdown in recorded history back in 1986, spreading deadly radiation across Ukraine and Eastern Europe, it was built as a small residential city for workers that worked at the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power station. But it was quickly abandoned in large numbers after the incident. This disaster led to the creation of some of the most unsettling military hardware graveyards in the world, full of untouchable Soviet-era weapons left to decay in farmers' fields and woodland clearings. The power plant released unmanageable quantities of hazardous and toxic chemicals into the air after the meltdown, fatally infecting hundreds or even thousands of Pripyat residents. Throughout the next few days after the explosion, military forces stationed nearby assisted with the reaction to the blast's impacts and ordered the whole town to pack lightly and leave immediately. Pripyat was deserted in less than a week, except for a large number of military vehicles that were brought in to help with the nuclear cleanup, including some tanks, helicopters, armored personnel carriers, and heavy trucks. High-tech military equipment weighing thousands of tons was airlifted and transported into town, and hundreds of Ukrainian and Soviet soldiers were as well to operate them. To deal with the terrifying scenario that befell Chernobyl and its nearby villages, cutting-edge remote-controlled fire suppression equipment, radiation monitors, cherry pickers, and more were sent in too. The disaster turned out to be a major setback for the Soviet Union as a whole, which was still in charge of Ukraine during this period. Before more information about the disaster leaked to Western journalists, something had to be done to make news disappear. Rotating shifts for cleanup and response teams were implemented in an effort to reduce radioactive exposure on workers. Sadly, this strategy ultimately backfired and resulted in a large amount of casualties. Geiger readings revealed that every single vehicle carried into the disaster area was now highly radioactive, which was discovered while helicopters and trucks were being removed from Pripyat and nearby areas that were also hit by the meltdown. As a result, radiation-filled cocoons around all the soldiers exposed them to dangerously high levels of radiation that could cause cancer. Instead of trying to decontaminate and scrub clean these expensive vehicles, there was no choice but to just ditch them near Chernobyl's blast site. When it became impossible to drive tanks and trucks safely, they were abandoned and left to rot in Molyink, which is a Ukrainian burial site. To help with the cleanup after the meltdown, more machinery and military vehicles were brought in, and because of this, even more were similarly condemned and abandoned. Given that they were required to fly directly over the factory after the disaster in order to spray the required chemical solvents to put out fires raging underneath the blown-off roof, helicopters, enormous MiL-Mi 6-hook transporters, received some of the worst exposure. These aircraft were also dumped in burial sites, stacked amongst rows of dark green equipment. The Chernobyl nuclear power station at Pripyat, which has since been encased in a sarcophagus to prevent further radioactive material leaking out, still has some of these armored vehicles, tanks, helicopters, and even trains sitting and rotting in the surrounding fields today. These fields are separated by an area known as the Rosoka Equipment Cemetery. Most of the Chernobyl exclusion zone is off limits to the general public, but on occasion macabre tour groups are allowed to enter for a short visit before being asked to leave. But it is still forbidden to enter the abandoned vehicle graveyard. The Ukrainian government has spent countless hours and extravagant amounts of money safeguarding the Chernobyl plant, which is still only partially operational, and getting rid of the vehicle graveyard, which is packed to the brim with useless equipment. In order to ensure that the radiation released by these sites is completely contained, teams of professionals have entered the fields to disassemble significant portions of the graveyards and bury them. Even still, due to the enormous quantity of equipment used during the aftermath of the tragedy, the burial of every single piece of hardware will take many more years. The few intact war machines that are still in existence serve as silent reminders of the biggest nuclear accident in history, while they still hold radiation themselves. 1. Hanford Washington. Hanford Washington is utterly horrifying. What's even worse though is its ongoing possibility of contamination. Today, the most dangerous spot in the United States is believed to be in Hanford, Washington, which is only about 35 miles from the Oregon border. Life was pleasant along a bend of the expansive Columbia River before the 1940s and the sad hitting reality of World War II. People in the Washington towns of White Bluffs and Hanford grew peaches, grapes, and wheat. They farmed in the desert, raising their families, cattle, and sheep. Years before this, Native American tribes made the dry plain their seasonal home. These tribes still have treaty rights to hunt and fish along the same river. In the late 1930s, there was intense secrecy surrounding any aspect of clandestine nuclear research. The US military was eager to learn more about the catastrophic consequences of splitting an atom through a research work codenamed the Manhattan Project. More accurately, the competition between nations to build the first nuclear weapon. When the first plutonium particles were created in 1940, speculation became reality and Hanford's future was set in stone. The military was looking for the plutonium-239 isotope. A nuclear device called the Fat Man, because of its oblong shape, was already in the works, according to a few physicists at the then top-secret Los Alamos, New Mexico lab facilities. It had a plutonium base, unlike its cousin Little Boy that had a uranium base, but both had fatal outcomes. As plutonium's mother element, uranium is required for most of its production, and huge amounts of refined plutonium-239 would be necessary to keep up in the race to develop a war-ending weapon. Even knowing that the periodic element 94 existed at the time was frowned upon and secret. Documents that were classified during this period used the code terms 49 or product to refer to plutonium instead. The US government forcefully took control of 670 square miles of desert in the southeast region of Washington in February 1943. They did this by condemning the territory north of Richland, which included Hanford and White Bluffs. Similar to what happened in Oregon's Scoggins Valley, residents were given an ultimatum to pack up and leave within only 30 to 90 days. Fruit orchards were ripped up by their roots and homes were destroyed. Even the dead had to go. Their remains were dug up from the local cemetery and then laid to rest in Prosser, a nearby town. The Native American tribes were informed by the army that their hunting and fishing rights would be reduced heavily and eventually abolished altogether in violation of the Treaty of 1855. Small towns in rural America that were once prosperous were basically wiped out. Richland's population increased dramatically thanks to the project, going from less than 300 to over 11,000 people. Workers were not told what they were constructing. At the time, assisting the war effort was an ample reason. Despite this, patriotism was high. The Hanford site strictly maintained the policy of don't ask, don't tell. People went about their business casually before the first bomb was dropped on Japan, ignorant to what they were creating. DuPont, a manufacturer, started making newspaper ads seeking laborers for an unnamed war-building project in southeast Washington, promising attractive compensation and comfortable living quarters. The Hanford Engineer Works successfully built 554 structures, 3 nuclear reactors, and 3 820-foot canyons for processing the plutonium before the war ended. 4 electrical substations, 158 miles of rail, 386 miles of roads, and 780,000 cubic yards of concrete were all needed for the project. Between 90,000 and 146,000 people were killed when the uranium bomb called Little Boy detonated over Hiroshima, Japan on August 6, 1945. 3 days later, Fat Man exploded over Nagasaki, killing 39,000 to 80,000 people over the next 4 months. In 2010, Robert Alvarez, a former Energy Department official, claimed that Hanford held enough plutonium to make 1,800 similar bombs like those used to destroy Nagasaki. Even after the war was over, the Hanford site kept producing weapons-grade plutonium. The Atomic Energy Commission resumed production and generated 57 tons of the metallic material, in spite of increased threats from Soviet-era Russia to stop. The bulk of the 60,000 guns in the American arsenal could be equipped with this amount of ammunition. The average lifespan of each of the site's 9 reactors was only 22 years. After starting in 1963, decommissioning was finished in 1987 with the shutdown of N, the final reactor that was still used. Since then, the surrounding buildings in Hanford, Washington have been demolished and buried, and the majority of the reactors have been entombed or cocooned to allow the radioactive materials to decompose safely. Unfortunately, turning off any nuclear technology does not make it completely safe. A somber reminder of this fact is the Hanford ecological disaster, with 56 million gallons of poisonous waste. Hanford's environmental effects became noticeable as early as 1960, when a 55-foot whale that was killed off the Oregon coast was releasing gamma rays. Scientists suspected that it had consumed radioactive plankton polluted by garbage from the Columbia River. To clean up the damage left by Hanford, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and the Washington State Department of Ecology signed a tri-party agreement in 1989. According to the Oregonian's early 2021 story, Tank B-109's 123,000 gallons of radioactive waste are leaking into central Washington soil. Between 1946 and 1976, the massive tank, which was built for the Manhattan Project, collected waste from the Hanford Operations Center. This not only causes problems for Washington, but might also have a negative impact on Oregon and Idaho. 60% of Hanford's employees reported being exposed to harmful substances in some shape or form. The quantity of radioactive gas and garbage flowing into the groundwater and poisoning the air is even more terrifying. The Hanford site is about 35 miles from the Oregon border and only 230 miles from the major city of Portland. The future attempts to clean up the horrific mess left by Hanford is crucial for the state's well-being. The Department of Energy said in 2019 that it would extend the deadline for cleaning up the radioactive sludge at Hanford until 2100.
8. Boeing on a barge. In a bid to offer travelers something other than run-of-the-mill hotel accommodations, Irish entrepreneur David McGowan came up with the idea of building a transportation-themed luxury campground. He called it the Quirky Knights Glamping Village and chose the seaside town of Enniscrone as the perfect place to carry out his vision. McGowan, who's a funeral director by day, planned to turn a variety of vehicles into upscale hotel rooms for his guests, including train cars, boats, iconic black London taxicabs, and even an airplane. In 2015, he bought a decommissioned Boeing 767 that once flew for the now-defunct Russian airline Transaero, but needed a new home after the company went out of business. The 159-foot-long aircraft would become the centerpiece of McGowan's campground, but getting it to the property was no easy feat. After the plane arrived at Shannon Airport in County Clare, employees removed its wings and loaded it onto a truck. From there, it was transported to a waiting barge on the Shannon estuary, where it began the final 36-hour leg of its journey up the River Shannon. At the moment, it's unclear whether McGowan still plans to open a glamping village. There haven't been many updates on it since news of the plane's upriver journey went viral, and he hasn't mentioned the business on any of his public social media pages in quite some time. However, turning a commercial jet into an extravagant home away from home is a major undertaking, and perhaps it's still a work in progress. 7. The Death Railway. The 258-mile-long Burma Railway runs between Ban Pong, Thailand, and Thonburi Zayat in southeastern Myanmar. It's a scenic route that has numerous river crossings and winds through the dense, hilly jungle. When the British first entertained the concept during the late 19th century, they decided it would be impossible. The idea was revisited during World War II by the Japanese, who invaded Thailand in 1941 and forced the country into an alliance. Early the following year, Japan invaded Burma and seized control of it from the British. In 1942, Allied prisoners of war and captive civilian laborers were forced to build the Burma Railway, which quickly became known as the Death Railway, due to the enormous number of lives it claimed during its construction. It's estimated that over 12,000 of the 60,000 Allied POWs and roughly 90,000 civilian laborers who built the railroad died. They received inadequate food rations that were typically spoiled and contaminated with bugs and rodent droppings. The workers also lacked enough drinkable water, leaving them malnourished and dehydrated. Diseases like dysentery, cholera, and malaria ran rampant throughout the tropical environment, and medical care was scarce. Most of the Burmese section of the railroad fell into disrepair decades ago, but the Thai section continues to operate today. There are numerous memorial and pilgrimage sites along the railroad, including the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery, where 7,000 Allied POWs are buried. There's also the Hellfire Pass Memorial Museum and Walking Trail, which sees around 100,000 visitors every year. 6. Elblag Canal. The water levels and elevation along modern-day Poland's 50-mile-long Elblag Canal varies steeply, leaving parts of it completely dry. During the 19th century, the King of Prussia began to wonder if there was a way to make it navigable for boats despite knowing that it would be impossible to do using a system of traditional locks. In 1825, the king turned to renowned German architect Georg Stink and asked him to come up with a solution. After nearly 20 years of planning, construction on Stink's experimental design finally began in 1844, and the canal was later opened in 1860. To overcome the inconsistencies in altitude and water levels, Stink employed a combination of locks and inclined planes. This enabled small boats to hitch a ride through the dry sections of the route on a rail-like car. The system can accommodate vessels a little over 80 feet long and weighing up to 55 tons. When a boat reaches a waterless stretch of the canal, it enters a cradle-like compartment on wheels, which carries it overland to the next section of water. Today, the canal is primarily a tourist attraction, giving visitors the option to ride along for the entire 11-hour journey or hop on and off at certain points. It wasn't originally built for leisure, but was a shipping route, and it significantly decreased the amount of time it took to transport goods between the two regions that it connects. When it first opened, the canal was considered an amazing feat of engineering, and it continues to fascinate today. 5. Wuppertal-Schwebebahn. Monorails offer a convenient and quick way to get from one place to another, enabling commuters and travelers to bypass traffic, red lights, and other things that tend to slow people down on the road. Japan has the highest number of monorails in the world, but as urban populations grow and traffic congestion worsens, many cities and regions around the world have implemented and expanded their own monorail systems in recent years. While most of these systems look similar to a traditional elevated railway, some monorails are suspended from their track rather than on top of it. The oldest suspended monorail that's still in operation today is the Wuppertal-Schwebebahn in Germany. Designed in the late 19th century, it was built in the city of Wuppertal after several other cities rejected the concept, including Berlin and Munich. Today, it continues to transport passengers along the same 8.3-mile loop that it offered to its first riders in 1901. Since then, numerous suspended monorails have popped up in various places throughout the world. The longest is the 9.4-mile-long Chiba Urban Monorail in Japan. Located east of Tokyo on the island of Honshu, it services 18 stations and consists of 2 main lines. Suspended monorails aren't a popular form of travel, but the existing systems seem to serve their populations well. Have you ever traveled on a monorail? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 4. The Railway to Heaven. Spanning 970,000 square miles, the Tibetan Plateau is the world's highest and largest plateau above sea level. With an average elevation exceeding 14,800 feet, it's a place where mankind once thought it would be impossible to build a railway. Oxygen levels are about half of what they are at sea level, making altitude sickness not only a possibility, but almost a guarantee for anyone who isn't used to the elevation. This alone would pose severe hazards and complications to workers. However, a railway would serve as a vital connection between some of China's most populated urban centers and remote cities throughout the Tibetan Plateau, so authorities were determined to make it happen. To combat the oxygen shortage, pressurized chambers mimicking the oxygen content at sea level were placed along the route for workers who fell ill. Nicknamed the Railway to Heaven, the Qinghai Tibet Railway opened in 1984 and was expanded in 2006. Each passenger rail car that runs along the route today is equipped with its own oxygen supply system as well as oxygen masks. The train's engines are also turbocharged, giving them enough strength to power through the thin atmosphere. A large portion of the railroad is built on permafrost, and to prevent it from melting under the heat of the passing trains, the tracks are placed on elevated rock piles. This allows hot air to be dispersed by passing winds before it hits the ground. Along one stretch of the railroad, the ground is only frozen for part of the year, requiring a bridge to carry the train safely. Climate change could challenge the system's ability to continue operating in the future. But for now, experts are keeping a close eye on the conditions and doing everything possible to keep the railroad running while also protecting the environment. Altogether, the route consists of 675 bridges and 47 tunnels. The railway runs along the Tangula Pass, which is home to the world's highest rail station at 16,640 feet above sea level. In addition to transporting residents, the Qinghai-Tibet Railway has become popular among tourists as a thrilling and low-cost way to see Tibet, with a one-way ticket for a private sleeper cabin typically costing less than $200. 3. The Fallkirk Wheel. Connecting Scotland's Forth and Clyde Canal with the Union Canal has always been a complicated matter. Until 1933, a series of 11 locks linked the two canals together, and the journey took nearly an entire day. In the decades after the locks were dismantled, officials visited and revisited the idea of once again reconnecting the canals. Finally, in 2002, the Fallkirk Wheel was opened, and is still the world's only rotating boat lift today. The parts for the wheel were built and assembled in Derbyshire, England. They were then disassembled, transported to Falkirk, bolted together, and crane lifted into place. Over 1,000 construction workers were required for the project, and around 1,200 tons of steel were used to complete the wheel, along with more than 14,000 hand-tightened bolts. The 115-foot wheel is the equivalent height of 8 double-decker buses stacked on top of each other. It consists of 2 gondolas that were designed based on a principle discovered by the ancient Greek engineer Archimedes, which states that floating objects displace their own weight in water. Therefore, the weight of the contents of each gondola are always the same, even if one is empty and the other contains a boat. For safety, the water levels are monitored by electric sensors to ensure they're equal. Powered by 10 hydraulic motors, the wheel transports the boats in each gondola to their respective canals in just 4 minutes. It can rotate both clockwise and counterclockwise. And the operator in the control room is responsible for rotating the lift in both directions equally to reduce wear on its bearings and other moving parts. During the rotation, the gondolas are kept in the upright position by a simple set of cogs. Perhaps the most amazing feature of the Fallkirk Wheel is its energy efficiency. Operating the wheel only requires the same amount of energy as boiling 8 electric kettles, thanks to the principles of balance and equilibrium that its design was based on. 2. Poman Bridge. Opened in 1914, the Poman Bridge connects Ramaswaram Island in the Palk Strait with the southern Indian mainland. It was India's first sea bridge, and until 2010, the country's longest, measuring nearly 1.3 miles from one end to the other. In one sense, the structure isn't very remarkable. It was built using conventional methods and sits on concrete piers that were sunk and secured into the seabed. However, it was a remarkable engineering feat for the time it was built, and it only took about 3 years to construct. It's fairly remarkable that the more than 100-year-old structure is still standing, especially in an environment with corrosive rough seas and heavy winds. The region is also prone to cyclones, and the bridge survived a particularly destructive storm in 1964. Midway through the bridge, there's a movable structure called a bascule, which raises to let ships and barges pass and then lowers back down, allowing train traffic to resume as normal. Between 10 and 15 small boats pass through each month, according to the Economic Times. Due to its age, experts continuously monitor the Poman Bridge in an effort to gauge its remaining lifespan. They base their predictions on various factors, including the extent of its corrosion. Until the opening of a road bridge in 1988, the Poman Bridge was the only surface transport linking the island to the mainland. The existence of both bridges offers two different ways to reach the Ramanathaswamy Temple, which attracts hundreds of pilgrims on a daily basis. 1. The Chunnel. The Channel Tunnel, famously nicknamed the Chunnel, is the world's longest underwater tunnel. It runs between Britain and France, connecting the United Kingdom to the mainland Europe via the English Channel. It measures 31 miles and consists of 3 tunnels, 2 of which are used for trains, and a third that serves as an emergency exit and a maintenance tunnel. Before the Chunnel was completed in 1994, traveling between Britain and France involved a 90-minute ferry ride, despite the short distance between the two countries. Today, it enables more than 50,000 commuters and travelers to traverse the English Channel in just 35 minutes. Building the Channel Tunnel presented challenges from every fathomable angle, from securing funding to acquiring experienced engineers and specialized tunnel boring machines. Skilled and unskilled workers also had to be hired and housed. Construction began simultaneously from both ends, with plans to meet in the middle. Tunnel boring machines burrowed through a layer of chalk underneath the channel, while hauling the debris out on conveyor belts. On the British side, the debris, also known as spoil, was brought up to the surface using railroad wagons. On the French side, the spoil was mixed with water and pumped out through a pipeline. As progress was made, the tunnel was lined with concrete. Aligning the tunnels to meet in the middle was among the project's biggest challenges. Nobody knew for sure if it would work. The calculations were made using special surveying equipment and lasers, and from there on out, everyone hoped for the best. Thankfully, the two sides of the service tunnel were officially connected on December 1st, 1990, and it remains one of Europe's most vital transportation systems. 7. HMS Audacious. The King George V-class battleship, HMS Audacious, was built in 1912 and was a member of the British Royal Navy's 2nd Battle Squadron. Although the ship was never given an opportunity to take part in actual combat, she did serve briefly for training and gunnery practice until becoming trapped by a mine off of Ireland's northwest coast in 1914. On October 24, 1914, she hit a mine planted by Berlin, a German auxiliary mine layer, while conducting training maneuvers. The crew quickly left the ship after many compartments, including the engine rooms, began to leak. As a result, the ship started sinking. Despite the terrible damage caused by the mine and the eventual sinking of the Audacious, only one person died in the accident. The RMS Olympic, HMS Liverpool, and HMS Fury arrived quickly to gather up the crew. They made many unsuccessful attempts to bring the Audacious back to Loch Swilly, thanks to the tow lines breaking while traversing through rough seas, and the ship sinking not far from where it had been originally damaged. The Royal Navy made an effort to conceal the entire incident after the loss of the Audacious, but it went horribly wrong. Rumors undoubtedly circulated, despite the fact that all survivors were told to keep the wreck secret to hide their strategy and the exact ship numbers from the Germans. This led to the inaccurate belief that an entire squadron of first-class ships had fallen to the hands of mines and U-boats. Certainly not the desired perception the Navy hoped for. 6. Loch Ness Monster. The alleged creature said to live in the lake's waters is popularly known as Nessie by locals whose homes are close to Loch Ness in northwest Scotland. Nessie is the most famous legendary lake creature in the world. Some others include Ogopogo, Okanagan Lake, British Columbia, Tahoe Tessie, California, and Mokele Mbembe. Nessie is shown as having an incredibly long neck and stubby paddle-like fins. Nessie may be elusive, but to many believers, she's real, without a second thought. A blurry image of Nessie was published in the Daily Mail way back in 1934. The surgeon's photograph, credited to London doctor Robert Kenneth Wilson, backed up the monster's existence before it was exposed as a well-made fake in 1994. Wilson simply handed it off to be published. But Operation Deep Scan in 1987 only helped to stoke the imaginations of those who kept searching for the creature, thought to be hiding deep under Loch Ness's waters. At a depth of 590 feet, or 180 meters, echo devices detected a pretty sizable moving object. There's something here that we don't understand, and there's something here that's larger than a fish, maybe some species that haven't been detected before, said Daryl Lawrence, whose business, Lawrence Electronics, supplied the sonar equipment for the investigation. What do you think? Is Nessie real? 5. The Bermuda Triangle. In a large triangle-shaped area of the Atlantic Ocean, loosely bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, countless ships and airplanes have disappeared without a trace. The strange instances have been accompanied by bizarre theories, ranging from magnetic anomalies to extraterrestrial abductions. 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, known as Flight 19, took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the afternoon of December 5, 1945, and went missing. The Avengers carried 14 men. It started out as a normal combat training trip, but by the time it was finished, the plane and crew had vanished somewhere over the North Atlantic. That night, the story developed further. 2 PBM Mariner flying boats were dispatched to look for the aircraft after the Navy lost contact with Flight 19. But 20 minutes after leaving, one of the Mariners also disappeared. The 13 crew members of that aircraft were never found. The moniker Bermuda Triangle wasn't being used yet at the time. It was first written by Vincent Gaddis in a 1964 Pulp magazine essay he wrote on the mission called Flight 19. Other tragedies in the Bermuda Triangle include the disappearances of the USS Cyclops, which had a crew of 309 men in 1918, and the cargo ship El Faro, which had 33 people on it in 2015, fairly recent. Although it's impossible to know for sure what happened to these ships and planes, it's most likely that human mistakes, severe weather, and technical failure were collectively to blame. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, the pilot of Flight 19, was convinced his compass was broken and instructed the planes to fly in the opposite direction. The pilots became even more confused as the weather kept getting worse. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, or 37.8 liters, we all go down together, said Taylor in his last radio message. Why do you think there have been so many disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle? Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 4. The Lost City of Atlantis. Another common watery mystery is that Atlantis was actually in the Black Sea, and Snake Island was once a small chunk of the drowned continent. A British engineer was able to investigate the layer of land immediately under the bottom of the Black Sea with the help of underwater topography visualization provided by Google Ocean software. They found a network of flawlessly sculpted streets that could only have been made by human hands. More significant evidence, according to British researchers, can be seen off the Romanian coast. The thriving society of Atlantis, which had its capital at Poseidonia, is described by the ancient philosopher Plato in his Dialogues. A fertile plain crossed with canals, a low mountain, water ditches connected by tunnels and bridges, 2 springs with hot and cold water gushing from the main mountain, temples, barracks, racetracks, gyms, and a royal palace. All could allegedly be found on the lost continent. It was believed that Atlantis had 1,200 vessels and 10,000 battleships during its heyday, all of which were commanded by King Avenor. He had a daughter named Cleito with his queen Leucippe. Legend has it that Cleito married the god Poseidon. Atlantis, Poseidon's oldest son, was given authority over the richer middle section of Atlantis, which supposedly covered an area of more than 61,776 square miles. or 160,000 square kilometers. Many historians and archaeologists have been searching for evidence of Atlantis ever since it was believed to have been submerged under the sea in a single day, after massive earthquakes and floods. According to one of these ideas, Atlantis drowned in an Egyptian sea called Siriath, which relates to the Black Sea. Russian researchers have also uncovered submerged remains on Snake Island that they attribute to possible ancient Atlanteans. They believe that Snake Island is the final piece of the legend of Atlantis. The islanders who lived there were once known as Blagini, which means blessed, and could have been Atlantean ancestors. Whether it's true or not, this is still one of the greatest and most researched Black Sea mysteries. 3. Ghost Ship of Topsail Island. Blackbeard the pirate was a terrifying force of nature. He terrorized coastal Carolina and is rumored to have spent time on Topsail Island. Blackbeard and his band of pirates terrified naval explorers in the Atlantic Ocean and Caribbean Sea from 1716 to 1718. And tales of their pirate exploits are told along the eastern seaboard to this day. His most well-known ship was called the Queen Anne's Revenge, which is said to have been grounded at North Carolina's Beaufort Inlet in 1718. At Ocracoke, an island in North Carolina, it's believed that Blackbeard came face-to-face with Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. The pirate met a disastrous end when his head swung from the bow of Maynard's ship. While looking for Blackbeard's massive treasure, Maynard only found supplies and letters. The location of Blackbeard's riches was a secret kept on his deathbed. Some claim that Blackbeard gave his most prized possessions to Topsail Island. There's a rumor that Topsail Beach has a supposedly bottomless pit that locals call the Gold Hole. According to local mythology, a group of northern treasure hunters visited Topsail in the middle of the 1900s and found Blackbeard's riches there. They worked late into the night for many weeks in the Gold Hole, but they suddenly left one morning, having mysteriously vanished. They seem to have never visited Topsail Island despite the stories. Some claim the Gold Hole is no longer there since Blackbeard's treasure was discovered and abandoned that hot summer night. 2. Shipwrecks of the Black Sea. The mysterious Dead Zone on the Black Sea has 60 surviving ships. They date from all the way back to Alexander the Great's rule up to the 19th century. Many wrecks have survived through the effects of time, including a Cossack raiding fleet from the 17th century and some Roman merchant ships. In fact, a Greek merchant ship more than 2,400 years old was found 1 mile or 2 kilometers below the water's surface in the Dead Zone back in 2017. Some of the mysterious vessels have wood that has been preserved so well that individual chisel and tool marks are still visible on their boards. Usually salt and bacteria eat away at the material until nothing is left. Wood and rope are typically the first things to be eaten by the sea. A group of experts from around the world found this amazing spot between 492 and 7,218 feet, or 150 and 2,200 meters, beneath the Black Sea's surface. While using sonar and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, that cost nearly $8 million apiece to survey the ocean floor, the crew zeroed in on the location. According to scientists, the unique chemistry of the Black Sea is the reason the ships are so well maintained. The project's chief investigator, John Adams, said the Black Sea was actually the Black Lake when the last ice age ended almost 12,000 years ago. As the climate got warmer and the sea level rose, water from the Mediterranean started to overflow into the rivers that fed into the Black Sea. This resulted in the Black Sea having 2 separate levels of water, since both freshwater and salty rivers were now supplying it. There is plenty of oxygen in the less salty upper layer of the water, but nearly none at all in the deeper. This explains why the ships have maintained themselves for millennia in such excellent conditions. According to Professor Adams, nobody has ever seen anything like it. Thanks to historical documents and drawings, scientists and historians have some ideas about where these amazing wrecks came from. Some of the ships were built while the Byzantine Empire held dominance over the area in the late 800s. But there are also vessels from the Ottoman Empire's 16th to 18th centuries. and an Italian ship from the Middle Ages from the 1300s. A majority of the wrecks were shipping merchant products, including metals, wood, and wine. One of the boats is a coca, or circular ship, which is one of the greatest known surviving examples of a Venetian ship from the Middle Ages. The vessel is said to have sunk in the 13th century, at the height of Venice's Golden Age. It was when Marco Polo was exploring the wonders of the globe. We are aware of the Italians' significant role in the Black Sea commerce during the Middle Ages, but it's still amazing to witness a ship that Marco Polo himself may have recognized. The type of clay pots they were hauling, as well as the arrangement of masts and rigging, can help archaeologists determine the origins of all the haunting remains. Despite 3 of the ships seeming to have been raiding vessels, suggesting piracy, all of the boats seem to have sunk in storms instead of naval battles. The researchers stayed on the Strill Explorer for over a month in order to document their amazing finds with pictures and films. They combined the photographs digitally to create 3D reconstructions of the 60 wrecks, which were spread across 772 square miles, or 2,000 square kilometers. 1. Japan's Atlantis. A discovery made in the waters off Yonaguni, Japan's southern shore, has baffled scientists, historians, and archaeologists, and sparked plenty of discussions. Under the water, it's believed that submerged remains of a lost civilization, estimated to be 10,000 years old, were located. While experts claim the ruins are man-made, more traditional scientists believe that natural forces generated and carved out the structures. Kihachiro Aratake, who strayed slightly off the path from the Okinawa shoreline, first stumbled upon this amazing, surreal Atlantis in 1995. Kihachiro discovered a building 19 feet or 6 meters below the water's surface, which seemed to have been created by humans. Naturally, this got the attention of experts immediately. As a result, significant effort was put forth to explore the site in an effort to uncover its roots, a procedure that quickly yielded some fascinating discoveries. The Yonaguni Monument, otherwise known as Japan's Atlantis, was researched by scientists. They found a massive arch made of monolithic stone blocks, a crossroads, and many carvings. The big pyramid-like building, which was 249 feet or 76 meters in length, also had beautiful stairs with it. At first glance, it's practically impossible to believe these structures are anything other than the remains of an ancient civilization. Undoubtedly, this was once a booming city full of life. But after a devastating earthquake in the area known for strong tectonic activity, it was likely drowned by the sea. Many of the top marine geologists in the world disagree, though, claiming the monument is actually a rock formation that has been shaped over millions of years by wave erosion. Scientists are a skeptic group at the best sometimes, but looking at dates, the Yonaguni site simply doesn't line up with what's currently known about human history. It may or may not have been created by humans. Its stunning sights, on the other hand, cannot be disputed. Thanks for watching. Do you believe in Atlantis? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.